So welcome everybody. Thank you so much for attending either in person or virtually this tech briefing. And I wanted to say thank you to the UIT Tech Briefing team for making this possible. This is in fact one of our first meetups of the API developers community of practice here at Stanford. So this got started because I was polling the community on what tools people are using. Community of practice is valuable when it's practical and real, and that kind of knowledge transfer about tooling and things like that. So what came back from that survey is that almost everybody was using Postman in some way or other. So I was like, okay, let's see what we can do about leveraging that and turn this into a real learning community. So I tried to figure out how people were using the tool, and so Dave Crutchfield is going to be joining us soon, talking about how the School of Medicine is using Postman, because they were one of the more regular users. And from my perspective, I'm really interested in learning what we can from the community about what developers really do. So the patterns that we're trying to follow with our API design initiatives here at Stanford is following good DX, developer experience. Your API is going to be successful if it makes sense to developers and they actually use it. I think that there's something happening with Postman right now where it's a little different from some of the other gateways and documentation tools and things like that, where it kind of captures what developers really do and make that a shareable thing. I've never actually done that myself, so I'm looking forward to hearing from the Postman team. So we've got Dave coming up first, and then we have several folks from Postman here with us today, and I'll have them introduce themselves as they come on. So, so thank you very much for your time. I don't know if we'll use the full 2 hours. If we have time left at the end, I'd really like to open it up to questions about Postman. We've got some of the authorities here today, but also other tools and techniques that you guys are using that are working for you. So, Dave, you're up. I got you. Sorry, Shay.
Now that everybody's awake, thank you, Zach, for inviting me to speak. As Zach was mentioning, he reached out and I informed him that we use Postman, and now I'm standing here. So you can figure out the lesson there.
It looks like you may have to, there you go.
So this should be pretty quick because I too am very interested in hearing what the folks from Postman have to say. But I wanted to tell a couple stories around how we came to use Postman in the School of Medicine. I work on the IRT application services team in the School of Medicine, and a few of us, we work a lot with APIs and developing APIs, integrating with different APIs. And over time, Postman became the tool that we kind of use to help us do our work. So why Postman? For us, it makes interacting with an existing API very easy. You can do some of the stuff, like very basic things you can do in the browser, but it actually gives you a little bit more functionality where you can kind of manipulate headers, play around with different parameters. And when we started using Postman, it was actually a Chrome-based application, and it actually integrated very nicely with Chrome. So things like interacting with APIs, I have it kind of crossed out at the bottom here, but interacting with APIs that are behind WebAuth, if you've ever tried to do that outside of a browser context, it's pretty difficult to do. But with that interceptor technology that Postman had, it was able to kind of leverage the cookies that are set when you log in via WebAuth and actually pass that off to the Postman app itself. And then you'll be able to kind of interact with those APIs using Postman. The other nice feature that it has that's I've found makes my life a little easier is that it tracks the history of your ad hoc experimentation. So, you might play around with an API and then come back a week later and want to remember what were those parameters I was using or what were those endpoints, and it's all right there. You can just click on the history and you're back to where you were. Another nice feature is the support that it has for like standard authentication mechanisms. So, I mentioned APIs that are behind WebAuth. That's really not ideal for us to have, but we do have them. But we also have APIs that are behind OAuth too. And it's kind of nice to be able to throw in, your client ID and secret, generate that token, and then apply that to all your different calls. And they manage that really well, so you don't have to keep digging up that information every time you want to make an API call. Another feature is collections. We use this. The nice thing about this is once you kind of get used to playing around with Postman and there's APIs that you interact with, we actually have some endpoints that actually execute jobs or do things, but they don't have a UI. So we've put those calls into a collection, and we can pass that collection around amongst the team so that, one person sets it up, can share it with the rest of the team. They can import that into their Postman app. And then when we get a support call that says, hey, can you kick this job off for us? We just go and click a button and the job's kicked off. So that's actually a feature we use pretty frequently.
Hey, Dave. One of the things that tripped me up the first time I saw this was I was confused what collection meant. So it's not a JSON collection.
No.
Something in particular in Postman, right?
Yeah, and I'm gonna show kind of this stuff in right after this actually. There's more features that I've noticed. So I don't know what the actual timeline is. You guys will probably speak to that. But they're sometime within the last year or so, they've actually moved out of being just a Chrome app and have kind of graduated to being like a full-scale native application. And I've noticed some features have come along with that, and I'm interested in learning more about those features. Specifically, mock server seems to be very interesting, and it's something that our dev team has talked a lot about because we develop UIs that are based on APIs a lot of times that don't exist yet. So being able to mock out that API quickly and get the UI development going would be huge. So I'm very interested in learning more about that. And then I've also noticed the collection runner seems to be some way of automating test runs. And so I want to learn more about that. We haven't used that stuff, but I'm looking forward to hearing what you guys have to say about it. So I wanted to share a couple of stories about how, I've used Postman in the past, and hopefully it helps illustrate some of these features that we just talked about. So, okay. So when you start up Postman, you're kind of dropped into pretty intuitive UI. You've probably seen other REST clients. Like before Postman, I used a plugin in Firefox called REST Client, and I also use Chrome DevTools. But it's just pretty intuitive. It's pretty straightforward. I had this all set up and my laptop crashed before I got here, so of course that happens, right? And I might have lost my keys. That's fine. Oh, here it is. One of them. Yeah, here we go. Okay, so a couple years ago, we run GitLab internally in our group, and we were running a very old version of GitLab. And when we got around to upgrading, I think we were maybe 2 major versions behind. So the upgrade process would have been very difficult to migrate that existing kind of setup over to this new version of GitLab. So we ended up doing is installing a fresh install of GitLab, and then using GitLab's APIs, I was able to kind of pull all the things that we cared about from the old system over to the new system. And I did that by writing a handful of Python scripts. But the way that I was able to kind of iterate on that quickly, like I didn't want to iterate on the whole code, build, run cycle. GitLab has very good documentation, And so using that documentation in combination with using Postman, I was able to pretty much mock out most of everything that I wanted to do. And let me just start with a fresh tab. So for instance, we had to kind of copy over our groups. And I'm going to reset that token after this demo. And that basically will give us the ability, all right, I have to bash in to get to this, and I'm not going to do that because it may take too long. But I'll do it with the V4 one. So here, as you can see, I can kind of just do ad hoc queries, get the results I need to get, and I'm kind of off and running. And doing this, I was able to do everything that I needed to do in my program. So the first item was to query all the groups out. I was actually pulling certain fields out of the response, and in the old version they were named one way, but they changed the format for the new version. So I was able to kind of do that translation in Python and test all that stuff out while I was writing the code, so that I wasn't just kind of coding, testing, coding, testing, coding, testing. I kind of formulated everything here in Postman, and it actually allowed me to write that script very quickly, and we were able to migrate all our groups, users, GitLab repos, everything was very quickly migrated over, and it was nice. I mean, having this tool made it very easy to kind of get my work done. And the nice thing that I kind of spoke about earlier is, you get kind of, right now I cleared out my history, but as you work with GitLab, with Postman, it kind of tracks, just like your browser history, it tracks all your request history. And, you get a lot of information here. You see headers, obviously the body, you can set headers. And like I said, I don't know much about these tabs, so you guys will probably talk about it. And then the other example I wanted to show is the ability to kind of pass around collections that we have for CAP. And so I need to do one thing. So this one is a little weird because I imported the file, but it doesn't show up here. So I've found a little trick that kind of magically makes my collection show up.
What's the magic trick?
Yeah, so basically I have a collection of JSON files that I exported from a pre-configured set of collections and environments. And then when I use this import feature, it has a number of options. So you can just point to a folder, and anything in there that it recognizes, it pulls in. It imported the environment, but the environments don't show up right away. You kind of have to probably poke it a little bit to refresh the cache or something. So we use this with CAP API, and the nice thing about this approach is that I can have all these endpoints defined. We do have a Swagger console with CAP API, but it doesn't necessarily, like the client ID that it's set up with is more for public-facing API developers. So yeah, exactly. And I wanted to do administrative things that the console just isn't configured for. Yes.
If I can just mention, for those who are joining us online, they won't be able to hear certain comments. So there's anything you should need to bear repeating, please.
Yeah. Yeah. So Zach just mentioned about the different scopes that come along with setting up CAP API, and the API console right now is pretty much read-only. But we have a number of triggers that are in that API as well that we can do certain administrative jobs with. So I set that up here, and to kind of show the nice thing about this. So if I want to do a lookup, and this is just basically a profile lookup, nothing fancy. But the nice thing here is that I'm doing it against the dev environment. But then if there's an issue in prod, I just switch my environment context and I run it again. Now I'm actually pointing to the production API and I'm executing against that API. So I find this very convenient. It's also a little dangerous because luckily we don't have any jobs that are destructive, but if we did, I mean, you have to pay attention to which environment you're in, right? But luckily we don't have that problem with CAP. The other thing is it uses, basically this whole environment mechanism is just a way to kind of define parameters and associate those to some context, right? So in this case, I have like a host defined that points to the CAP dev host name, and then UAT and prod have their corresponding host names. The other nice thing about this collection, you may have noticed I didn't actually do any setup for the authentication. That actually is all in the collection definition. And well, I'm not going to show this authorization tab because I think that's an actual live secret, and so I don't want to let that out. But basically, let's do this. We can create a new one. And so the nice thing here is it supports a lot of different auth mechanisms. So, you know, if you're in AWS, well, you can add your access key and your secret. The stuff that we're using is in OAuth 2, so you can manage your tokens here, and they have a way of, well, so yeah, I was expecting that to be empty. But yeah, so they have different mechanisms, basic auth, digest, and so on and so forth. So it's kind of nice because you can associate that mechanism at the collection level, and then every endpoint that you call under it will use it, which is pretty convenient. You don't have to do that every time. And yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. That's kind of the extent of how I use Postman. I mean, I cleaned up the console for this demo. Obviously, there was a lot of history and a lot of random things going on, but yeah, this is kind of my tool of choice when I'm working with the API. And that's pretty much it. So I can turn it over to
questions before we kick it over to the Postman team. One quick question: the connection that you are working on, is it being worked upon just by you, or like people
no.
work on it together?
Yeah, so I should probably show that. So yeah, so the question was, is this collection only something that I use, or is it being shared with others? And the answer is it's being shared. You can basically export the collection, and when you export it, it creates a JSON file, and then that file can be shared with another developer. And so we've done that where someone's working on CAP, we just Slack them the file, or I mean, it's not committed in source control or anything, but you know, we kind of pass these files around, and it makes it easy to kind of get up and running. Any other questions? Yes.
You talked about for one of those APIs that you needed to go through the Bastion. Is that, can you tunnel through a Bastion host, or is it like a VPN?
Yeah, that particular host is behind Bastion. The old version of GitLab is just behind Bastion, and I had Bastion on, but then when my laptop rebooted, I didn't log back in. So, yeah. Any other questions?
No questions through.
All righty. With that, I hand it off to the Postman.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks.
Laptop, right? Anyway, I'll get through my presentation and we'll see. All right. Thank you for being here, everyone. I'm really excited to be at Stanford. Zach and I had a great conversation when we met, and we felt like, you know, there's a lot to kind of learn from each other. And thank you, Dave, for, you know, taking us through how Postman's being used at Stanford. So what I wanted to cover in my talk was kind of just a broad overview of what Postman is, all the different corners of the product, and just some philosophy behind the product and all the new stuff that is going to come in. So let me start with, kind of defining what Postman is now. So a lot of people still wonder, why for all these years we've been building an HTTP client, what is left still? And we felt like, we need to define Postman a bit better. So, what Postman is now, it is a platform to build modern software where development essentially begins with an API. So what does that mean? So a few years back when I started coding, typically, you would start with code. That's the first thing you do. And APIs were generally an afterthought. You would think of, okay, integrating with other systems a little later. In some cases, you wouldn't even write an API. And, things would then kind of be thought of later. And that kind of caused a lot of issues. And now in this world, what we see is that APIs are typically kind of written first. Software systems are larger, and to make them actually even fit together, you have to make sure that APIs are thought of before code. So in some ways, we can even look at just how modern organizations are structured today. And if you look at larger systems, whether it's a small company building an app or a large organization, building a really big application, it's composed of all of these different APIs kind of working together. And the way I see it is, an API is kind of this outer boundary of your code base. So a lot of work and kind of tooling that's been created over the years is kind of for this internal code base that you're writing. And what happens is that when you kind of use that tooling for API development, a lot of problems kind of happen when you are a developer. And what exactly are these APIs doing? In some cases, you are sharing information with other systems through these APIs. In some cases, APIs are doing the work directly. You can call an API to kind of call a cab, or put a file somewhere on a server. You don't have to care about the internals of a system when you're working working with an API. So it really kind of gives you this nice abstraction where things are, for once kind of truly abstracted away. And in previous, ways of like software composition, you typically use, libraries that you'd have to compile and figure out what the development environment for that library is. So it kind of caused a lot of pain. But it's just easier to build larger and larger systems with APIs. So this new model of software development kind of gives you a lot of advantages. First is that you can just move faster by independently iterating on these APIs. You don't have to look at the entire system, how it fits together every single time you make a change. You can independently look at each of these APIs and make an improvement in one place without having to carry the whole system forward together. So it just gives you a lot more agility with your entire system. It also helps you focus on your core competencies. In a lot of cases, you can consume APIs either from different parts of the organization or from external SaaS providers. So that's become very popular these days, with APIs from the likes of Amazon Web Services, Stripe, Google, where you can just acquire functionality very, very easily, just with an API call. And you can focus on your core competencies instead. You don't have to rebuild the wheel over and over again. And it works both ways, both with internal APIs as well as external APIs. And that eventually helps you build better products and services. So these are kind of the general advantages of API-driven development that we've seen over the past few years. So, I did not realize all of this kind of on day one. What I started from was a very simple journey of trying to call an API. And when I look back at my journey as a developer, what I saw was that I was kind of working with APIs ever since I started writing code. And the most transformative experience I had while working with APIs was at Yahoo. This was at their Bangalore office, where I was an intern writing a front-end application. And my job was to kind of use this back-end API that they were developing. And it was very painful to kind of go through that process. The API was not documented. We had to run over to my manager's desk, whether what is this API? Is it working or not? Is it documented somewhere? And every single time there would be this API change, we'd have to do the same thing again. And I mean, as an intern, right, when your kind of software breaks and, we'd ship the product and people would be like, yeah, what happened? The intern broke the thing. And it was this constant painful experience that we had to do. And we knew that, the API is the problem because you don't typically see things beyond the API. Now, I moved on from Yahoo to found my first company called Teleport Me. And there I was building this sort of social street view. It was available as an app on the Android platform as well as the iPhone. And there I was on both sides of the equation. I was building the backend application to power those apps, and I was also writing the front end for that application. So here I was both consuming and producing an API. And I saw the same problem again. Now this was, kind of a 3-person team, while Yahoo was a much larger team. And I saw that the same problems of documenting the API, testing the API, debugging the API came all over again. And what I felt as a big problem for all of these functions was the tools available at that time were not good enough. Now, the default tool for everybody at that time, and in some cases to this day, was curl. So you would take a curl call, fire it off in the terminal, and your first job was to actually even construct the call, because that was really hard to do with curl syntax. You'd have like 50 different parameters, big JSON bodies, and you'd make a mistake. And the problem is when you make a mistake, even with a single character with an API, the call would fail. And this process kind of just really grinded on me. And to be honest, I really thought that this was something that somebody else would have solved already. So I went around looking for solutions, didn't find anything useful. And I was like, okay, I'm a developer. I think I can solve this. And I wrote Postman as a very simple HTTP client. And I had just very basic features. I think one of them Dave demoed was a history feature. All I wanted was, the REST client to just remember what I sent, so I can kind of go back and correct my mistake and send it all over again. Kind of like how website browsers work, right? You can press the back button, go back to where you came from. And this fundamental thing kind of did not exist. So, so I wrote the first version of Postman, put it up on the Chrome Web Store, and this is kind of what it looked like. Actually, this is a couple of iterations beyond the first version. Had the history feature, had a bunch of things around authorization. Those are at the top in this layout. And it really, like, as I started using it myself in my development process, I started I started enjoying working with APIs again. And this seemed to resonate with a lot of people. So, I mean, as my marketing tool, what I did was I posted this answer on Stack Overflow where somebody else seemed to have the same problem. And I put this answer up saying that, hey, I'm working on this Chrome app called Postman to help you work with APIs a little bit better. And I started getting a lot of upvotes on that answer. And, it kind of took off from there. Postman started being recommended in, blogs, in conferences, in books. And for a long time, I was very excited about the upvotes here. I was like not looking at Postman as a company, and I was like, this is something useful, and my Stack Overflow ranking is improving. This seems to be a really good, really good thing. So, but when it took off, it really took off. We went from about from 0 to 500,000 users just through this word of mouth adoption, and we weren't even a real company yet. So at a point, Postman was being used so much that companies started sending us checks that we are getting so much value out of the product, and for all the other things we are paying, and we feel bad that you are, it's a free tool. So take this check and kind of keep the good work on. So that was really exciting, and it was really kind of, we were genuinely interested in kind of what's going on. Why are people so excited about using Postman? What exactly are they doing? So when we started kind of looking into what exactly was going on in the development world, why are people using Postman so much? What are the workflows in which Postman is in? We kind of mapped out the ecosystem. What exactly is the workflow for a developer? And we found out that when you're working with APIs, and they kind of go through this whole life cycle of design, development, testing, documentation, mocking. And fundamentally, developers put together this this life cycle through different tools. And these tools don't really work well with each other. They don't share information with each other. They use different formats themselves. And when you want to kind of reuse your work from one tool to another, you just have to do all the work all over again. So, for example, if you built a sequence of curl calls and then you wanted to automate that into an automation framework, you would have to do that work over again. If you were documenting an API, again, you would have to rewrite your automation test framework. So we saw this as a fundamental problem in the way API development life cycles work. And because of these tools being separate, we saw that we could broadly say two things about the state of the API development ecosystem. One is that developer tools, of course, don't talk to each other, but because of that, people building APIs and consuming APIs also don't talk to each other. Like, it's a function of how the tools that you're using create organizational problems when you're working with APIs. And this seemed to us a little wrong, in a way that APIs are supposed to connect different systems and different functions together. But if you can't really work together, then all the value that you can realize from APIs would be lost. So when we started the company, we looked at solving this broader problem as a company. And along the way, we've so I'll talk about how we have been solving this problem, but we have had massive growth since as a company. So now we have more than 5 million users and more than 2.5 million monthly active users. And there's a large community of developers which works with us in making Postman better. And we listen to the feedback very, very closely, because we still learn something new kind of every day. And even though our products kind of span the whole spectrum from a developer to a large enterprise, our focus is always on the developer. How can we shave off a few seconds from a developer's workflow? How can we make life a little bit easier? And what we have seen over the years is just those small improvements kind of create a big effect on the overall organization. So we're big believers in the productivity of a developer. And this is something that we found out that as a company, nobody else was seeing. The focus was always on the enterprise. That, okay, APIs are important for the enterprise. Enterprise needs to do, have a gateway, do this and that. So there were very, very expensive tools being deployed, but not really addressing the needs of a developer. So fundamentally as a company, we aligned ourselves on developer productivity. So coming back to, what composes Postman as a platform, we have 3 building blocks for Postman. So the first one is collections. I'll talk about this in the next few slides. Then we have tools that go into improving your workflow, like designing, mocking, testing, etc. And then there is this notion of workspaces. So this one is really powerful, and I'll talk about this as well. So kind of going from this world of this really broken development workflow, this is what a super smooth workflow for APIs looks like. And it's kind of a cycle. You don't really kind of stop at one point and then it's kind of all done. It's a continuous process of iteration and learning that you need to do when you're building APIs. But fundamentally, it would begin with kind of designing and mocking an API, right? So earlier, what developers used to do was, they'd write code, then the API would get written, and then only after that fact would other parts of the organization come into action. So your front-end developers, your QA developers don't even have anything to play with. So what we recommend is that you write out your API in Postman, build a mock server, and now you can have parallel streams of development rather than a waterfall model of one thing after the other. Postman at its heart, started off as a debugging tool, so we have made a lot of improvements there in the debugging workflow. Along with debugging, which is kind of like manual testing, we have very powerful automation testing tools built right into Postman. You don't have to install anything. You don't have to take a lot of time to kind of get started with. You can start with one line of code, and Postman will run code for you, and you can take that code, plug it into your CI/CD pipeline, connect it through an API, and you can have a very integrated workflow while you're working in Postman. You get very powerful documentation tools. So Postman allows you to add markdown descriptions to your APIs, and it can render beautiful looking documentation in a browser that you can share with others. So you don't have to be limited to Postman, or the consumers of an API don't have to be limited to Postman when they want to see what an API is doing. Now, this lifecycle kind of comes to pretty much like the pre-production phase of an API. When you go and ship your API, you would want to make sure whether this API is working or not. So we have monitoring tools there. And because all of this fundamentally works together, you can reuse the knowledge that you kind of put together in your testing framework into your monitoring system, and make sure whether your APIs are up or not, whether they're behaving correctly in production scenarios. And finally, if you are producing APIs for external consumers, if you want to bring third-party developers in, you can use our publishing tools to publish the API externally. We also have an API network now that would help you connect to third-party developers and spread your API to everybody. And because the API is published in a consumable format, onboarding is very, very easy for you as a publisher. And for the developer, it makes their life a lot easier. So fundamentally, all of these tools that we have around designing, mocking, testing, monitoring, work off this idea of a collection. So you might be familiar with API description formats like Swagger and OpenAPI or API Blueprint. The definition of a collection is a little broader. So a collection is an executable description of an API. So rather than a static description of an API, you get an executable description, which of course you can send in Postman. And what it is composed of is, the base unit of an API request. You can add API metadata to those requests or the collection, so like descriptions and things like that. And you also can attach pieces of JavaScript code. And that lets you do all those things around your API development lifecycle pretty easily. And because everybody uses the same collection, all of these things are done by Postman for everybody. So instead of taking things from one phase to another, you basically come collaborate together on the same collection file, and everybody's input gets consolidated in one place. And collections are independent of any technology that you use. So any framework that you have, any gateway solution that you're using, all of that could be described using a collection. So it's not dependent on what you have there on your backend for you to be able to describe something in a collection. So in the newest version of Postman, we introduced the concept of workspaces. So this is something that we kind of evolved over time. When we introduced the ability for people to share and export collections, we saw use cases like the one that Dave shared, where you can export a file and have somebody else consume it. And when we saw basically that people are doing it a lot, like that unit of a collection was really valuable for everybody to kind of get started faster and work faster. And we saw sharing as a fundamental kind of construct in Postman. So we imagined a real-time collaborative environment for people to come together and work on the same thing and see the same things. So you can think of workspaces as this view over a shared data store. So think of kind of all the units of collections being stored in Postman, and what you have on top is different kinds of views. And that lets you kind of set the context of your API work, right? So you could be modeling workspaces on the basis of your team. So imagine a backend team kind of having their own workspace, a front-end team having their own workspace, or you could model it off projects. Maybe the CAP API could be one project that you're working on together, and you have documentation, integration tests, monitors for those things. Or you can model workspaces of departments. So you could have entire departments kind of collaborating together inside a workspace. So it's a very flexible construct for you to model your organization. And the cool thing with workspaces is that you can share collections across workspaces. And we saw that kind of as a fundamental fact of API collaboration. So in most cases, you have some internal APIs that you are building and consuming yourself. But to have other people collaborate with you, you expose an external API. And this could be just within a department. So you could have a workspace with all your collections, and then some collections that you share externally, and you can put that collection in other workspaces, or other people can consume those collections in their workspaces. So it's a very flexible construct, and it allows everybody in the organization to have their own context, as well as kind of the context that you want to provide them. And a side effect of building workspaces and them having collections is that you establish a single source of truth for all your APIs. So this was one of the most common problems we saw when organizations started adopting APIs, that where exactly are our APIs? In some cases, they are embedded in your code base. You have some description files lying around. Then there was a server that a developer built but left like 2 years ago, and you don't even know exactly what's going on. But when you have a developer's workflow being built on workspaces, you start enriching the workspace with information that you might find handy later. And what happens is that the entirety of the organizational knowledge around APIs comes together in one place. And this idea actually is not new. This has been attempted before with service catalogs and lots of enterprise tools. But because they never integrated with a developer's workflow, they would always kind of fall behind, and then nobody finds any use in it. And again, right, going back to our focus as a developer, we looked at this problem from their perspective. How can we give value to their productivity? And because at a very base unit, Postman will still help you debug your API. Once you're in a workspace, you still find value in that source of truth. So in some cases, you might find an API in a workspace, debug it, and find out it's not working as expected. Now you can go ahead and update documentation or update the test cases for that. So constantly you're enriching that source of truth, and that makes it valuable for everybody else. So we still believe this is the starting point for everything that we have done so far. We have solved for the first iteration of smoothing out that development workflow. Now we have a lot of exciting things on the roadmap. So some small things that we are working on right now is to kind of make the basic use cases of Postman a lot easier. We also kind of looking at how we can eliminate the idea of having to code in Postman. That's by kind of allowing you to kind of pick up values, chain together calls more visually. So that's going to come up soon. We are working on basic tools like finding and replacing things and mass across collections, or even merging together different collections. That's a common ask that we get. We have, if you go to the Postman new button, you'll see the API network listed there. So it was invite only, but we are opening it up to the whole community of developers. So if you are a public API publisher, you can reach out to more developers just very quickly. And we have tools coming up to help you manage that. Now, in the long term, we have some more exciting things. And one thing that we are very excited about is modularizing Postman itself. There are so many use cases of Postman now that we can't really address each one ourselves. And the idea is to help the community kind of enrich Postman by building plugins for the product. And related to that is full-scale schema support. So there are lots of ways of describing APIs now. We have OpenAPI, GraphQL, Waddle, WSDL, so many different ways to kind of look at how to define APIs. And we could have gone one way, but we decided that it might be better for Postman to support all of them. And we are looking at how we can bring together all these schemas in Postman properly. And at an enterprise level, as Postman is being adopted by larger and larger teams, they want to manage people more effectively. So how they can kind of define groups and how groups interact with workspaces is something that we are looking for on the long term. So to kind of summarize the talk, we believe that APIs are critical to building the modern organization now, and you can not realize. It's hard to realize the benefits of APIs if you don't focus on developer productivity and the lifecycle of an API. And what we have seen over the past few years while working with the community is that all the tools that we have developed have kind of come from like our shared experience, and our focus is to kind of help everyone get the most out of APIs. So some of the things that we do is kind of learn from great developer practices being done in forward-looking companies and kind of spread them around through the product. And there's still a lot more for us to do. I'm pretty excited about the future. And that's all I had. Thank you so much for listening. Happy to take questions, if any.
Yeah, I saw. So I read a post from Kin Lane recently where he was talking about exporting the Postman collection into an open API spec. So you mentioned lots of different schema support there, but is that a common pathway for people? I guess I'm trying to figure out is the that live experience of being in Postman, is that the documentation, or do you find that there are more organizations that are exporting out and then trying to have that official documentation live outside of Postman?
Okay.
Which one is the better thing to do?
So I'm biased there.
You can also give a synopsis or repeat the question.
Okay, so I think there are two parts to the question. One is, what's the workflow for going from Postman to OpenAPI, like description formats? And the second part, I guess, is which ones are organizations, which one do they prefer to use? If I get that right? So, so there are ways to export things out of Postman. One of them, I think, was in the demo. You can take a file out and then run it through a converter and integrate it with your repository. That's the slightly slower way. We have an inbuilt integration with this tool called Appimatic. So you can connect Appimatic to a GitHub repo, and it'll automatically kind of take a collection file and convert it and put it into your repo. The third thing is we also have a very powerful API through which you can just access the Postman collection and run it through a converter of your choice. So these are flows outward into the Open API file. It takes a little bit of a setup, but once you kind of get it going, it's pretty seamless. And the reason we've kind of kept it separate is because kind of our tooling runs on the Postman collection format. And there are, what we have seen is that people interpret the Open API or the Swagger file in different ways. So you could kind of have your own converter and, depending on what your workflow is. So what we have seen to kind of come to the second part of this thing is that once you get your workflow going in Postman, you don't need an external file unless you're integrating with other parts of the organization. So in most cases, we have teams kind of doing documentation, testing, all of that together in a workspace in Postman. And when they have external consumers of the API, they run it through the converting process. And that depends kind of on the requirements that the other team has. And I mean, now what the developer community does is both things. Postman's are really good at illustrating use cases and even documentation. It can do all the things that OpenAPI does. We don't do data modeling yet, which is where description formats come in. So just depends on what the consumers of the API are doing, right? And both things are possible. Any other questions? Is there anything on Zoom that I can answer? Okay.
There was one, but I want to ask a question of Dave that's actually related.
Mm-hmm.
So Dave, the way that your team ships that JSON around, like, do you guys have a particular type of license? Is there like a team setup that you have, or you guys have like the individual?
Not everyone.
So you can't but it doesn't. It sounds like it doesn't allow for that kind of shared environment, like that whole workspace thing. So I don't know. That might be something that I think we should think about and come back to later on the list or something, or in Slack. Like, should we think about? Because I think that you guys solve or probably know a whole bunch of stuff about the CAP API that I don't. That data model is kind of a monster, and I've figured out a couple things to get what I need done, but that's not written down anywhere. So anyway.
So I think we can have Joyce demo some bits of that, like the workspace bit and how kind of sharing works.
Yeah.
And this is like a very natural progression of kind of getting to use Postman in a collaborative setting. Like you start building a collection, then you share it with other people, and if other people find value in it, you'd probably find it doing more and more and more. And when you actually see that it's valuable to everybody, then you might want to shift to a faster workspace-driven model. Actually, one interesting thing that that workspaces allow, we actually didn't realize it, and we realized it after we kind of built the feature, was that workspaces not only just allow collection sharing, but also allow you to debug things together. Like the history that you have there, which is kind of unique to you, also is shareable. So you can actually, in a workspace, have collaborative debugging sessions. If somebody's kind of facing an API call that's not working, you can log into that workspace, send it again, and maybe a token is off or something is not working properly. So there are lots of interesting use cases. I think it would be good if we just walk through what workspaces kind of look like in a collaborative setting. Cool. All right. Thank you so much.
All right. So interesting. I think Dave had this use case where he was like, you had like a brand new workspace. So I will show you workspaces more in depth, but I have a very cluttered workspace. So I created a special one for demonstrations, and it looks a little bit cleaner. And then I have all my secrets kind of like hidden away. So one of the first things I'll show you is the Mox server. Do you guys currently use Mox?
No, but
Okay, so everyone understands the concept. Avinath was talking about comes in the design phase. Before a real endpoint is ready, you're going to sketch out like what you want. So this is actually one of the more advanced features, but I think you'll see why we're showing it first. So to create a mock, you can use this doohickey up here, the new button. And if you aren't that familiar with some of the features, like you probably use it for requests, but maybe not collection, maybe not environments, these are kind of some of the basic building blocks. And then you have some of the more advanced features. These are kind of like a quick start to get started. So I'm going to go ahead and click New button, Mock Server. And a mock requires two elements. One is going to be a unique request path. So I'm going to go ahead and enter demo here, and then a body. So I'm going to say an example body in straight text. So two things, request path and response body, and I'm going to click next. I'm going to give it a name demo, and you can attach an environment if you want. And by default, these mocks are publicly available, but you can make it private by clicking this. So I'm going to go ahead and click create. And this is going to be our mock URL, okay? Followed by our request path, which I believe was what, demo? Demo, okay. So I'm going to go ahead and close this. And when I close it, by default, by creating a mock, I've already created a collection that includes a request. And you can actually see our mock URL right here. I'm going to go ahead and look at the request. And also by default, we've created an environment. So our environment contains the URL. This is the mock URL. And you can see that's just a quick look. I'm looking at what value is inside this environment. If I hover over this URL, I can see the mock URL.
And it looks like the wrong window may be being shared.
Oh, dang it.
You're now seeing ZDemo purposes.
So let's do this.
Called demo, a request with a request called demo, and then we also have our environment right here. So if we hover over this variable, you can see this is the mock URL, and then we also have our unique path. So it's /demo. So if we were to go ahead and click send, you can see that you guys have used this before, send a request, receive a response. This is the response body that we had articulated earlier, text and example body. Is there a way to, this one? Okay, cool. So not super useful, right? So let's kind of dig down a little bit deeper. How do we update the body that we're going to return? We've also by default created an example. So up here, kind of subtly in the upper right corner, we have examples, and here's the default example that we saved to this request. So you can see you have your, you can add some unique headers, you can add an explicit body, you can update the status code. Say we want this to be like a 400 bad request, okay? You can save as many examples as you want to a request. Good case, bad case, unique case, whatever. And then for the body, I think I'm gonna make it JSON. Instead of straight text, I'm gonna go ahead and say like body Stanford, okay? So I'm going to save this new, I'm updating it. I've talked with my back-end developer, I've talked with my front-end developer, maybe I'm a PM and I'm like, this is how it should be. Go ahead and save the example. And then now when I hit the back button and go back to the same request /demo, I'm going to hit send. And now you can see it's 400 status code, whatever body you want. So that's like the use case for a mock in the design aspect, but you can also use it for QA or debugging. So there's a couple different ways to do that for mocks. Any questions about mocks?
Yeah, it looks like you can have more than one example. How would you?
Yeah. So there's a very specific matching algorithm. The easiest way to trigger a different type of response is to have a different unique path. So this could be like demo good. Well, this one would be like demo 400 or demo bad or something. So the matching algorithm goes from path variable to status code. You can also trigger it by saying like, I think the header is API mock response code 400. So there's a few ways that you can explicitly talk with whoever you're working with and say, this is how we trigger, this type of response, okay? So this is an example, and examples come into play in a couple different areas. You can use it for documentation, you can use it for communication, you can use it to actually hit a mock and return whatever you want. Any other questions about mocks? Okay. So it sounds like some of you at least are using variables. So in this case, this one was an environment variable called environment because we're saving it in a local environment. This is a really good way to do your server config. So I think that's how you used it before. So the very beginning part of this path would be, you know, I think you guys have dev, prod, and like UAT, right? So you can save your paths in here as a different variable. Other people use it for storing your secrets. So when you, I think, used, I forget which auth you were doing, you did OAuth 2 maybe, actually like Amazon, you went through so many auths. Yeah, okay, OAuth 2. So another way you could do that is, I think I have an example here. Okay, so Bitcoin Tracker is just a baby demo where there's 2 requests in it. And in this case, if I wanted to use basic auth, I'm going to go ahead and switch my environment. I've actually stored my secrets in here. These are real secrets, but they're demo secrets, so feel free to don't do anything bad. Okay, so I've hidden my secrets in here, and now I'm using the double curly braces syntax the same way you saw in the request URL area. Any place in the request that uses text, you can substitute, and it's just string substitution. So you can hide your secrets here. If I hover over it, I can see what the value is, what it's pulling from the actively selected environment. And that way, if I wanted to share this collection, either by exporting JSON or sharing it through a collaborative workspace, now I'm sharing what you have, but not my personal credentials. And what you would do is say, I would get a stub for an environment, and then I would sub in my own credentials. Yep. So that's like what we like to say is the best practice, at least for using environments and kind of shaving a little bit of time off of your workday. Okay, so you talked on auth already. We talked about headers. If you find yourself, you know, putting in the same headers, it's always content type application JSON or something. You have these presets so that you can recycle and just kind of pull in like a existing header configuration that you want to append to everything. We talked about, so body is also an area where if you had a raw body, you can also use the double curly braces. Something, I think somebody was talking about collection runner and being able to kind of automate test suites. These 2 sections are actually really special sections. So pre-request script and tests. One runs before the main request and one runs after. Pre-request runs before, tests runs after. These are areas that you can write JavaScript. So if you feel comfortable with JavaScript, go ahead and write any kind of logic you want. If you don't really know what a Postman test is, these little snippets here on the right side can kind of get you started where you can, like, I don't write that much chai syntax. So I pulled this in, status code is 201, and then this is what I would expect. So this is what we call a Postman test. And the name of the test is just the first parameter, something that's meaningful to you. And the second parameter is a function that will evaluate to true or false, and that's a passing or failing test. Go ahead.
So if you're using this in the context of like development, how would you track changes to this code? Kind of similar, like, you know, we use Git to track our code changes. How do you track code changes?
So the question is, how do you track changes to any changes with a collection? So associated with a collection, you can actually open up this little flyout here, and this is like collection details, and you can see a bunch of like meta stuff associated with that collection. And you can go to activity, and any kind of CUD, so create, update, delete, activities will show up here in this feed. Yep. So that's a good way to keep track of a collection. I think this activity feed is also at the workspace level, if you're curious about that, and then at the user level, if you just can't, like, what change did I do last week or something like that.
And you can also integrate a collection with GitHub. So or you can have a one-to-one mapping between like a collection and a repo, and the file will be transported onto collections. If you want to just see what's happening, you can also do that.
Yep. So just to amplify what Avinav just said, there's built-in integrations for, you guys use GitLab or something, to GitLab to kind of every time you make a change to a collection, it just automatically pushes to your GitLab repo or project.
One more thing that isn't evident here is if you are making code changes in the activity, you'll see the diffs, and you'll have the store points for all the changes in that collection. So even just within the context of Postman, without integrating with that, we'll have that level of version control.
So here's an example of what that diff looks like. So this is a more active collection that I'm working on in my messy personal workspace. But you can see the create, update, delete activities. And this is a diff that's generated. And I think this is for only people on the team plan where the diffs are generated, and you also have the ability to roll back to a certain point in time. Okay. So I'm switching back over to the demonstration workspace. So we're talking about pre-request script and tests. And so any type of setup that you have, if you're generating a dynamic like GUID or like anything that you would need in the primary, you could do that in the pre-request. You could do any calculations. And on the tests, you can also do any kind of assertions to say, yup, the response is what I expected it to be. And then beyond that, you can also do branching and looping logic, where if you get positive response, then you can set next request to a different request within the same collection. Yeah, so like some people, like right now this is a super baby collection, it has 2 requests, but some people will create folders and nested folders that say, here's happy path, login, authentication, like whatever, and then they'll kind of branch and loop, and you can iterate as many times as you want, like writing JavaScript. So I think this is actually an example of a baby collection that, let's take a look at what it does. So get Bitcoin exchange rate, let's go ahead and send it. Okay, so I think it's returns the current exchange rate for Bitcoin. Oh, you have the reverse scroll, hard to scroll. Okay, okay, whoa, that's, every time I give a demonstration, this, this number changes. So what I wanna do now is say like, if the rate is a certain level threshold, then I want it to do something. So in the tests, I'm gonna write some JavaScript, and I'm gonna go ahead and set my environment variables. So previously, you probably did config by going up here and then hitting edit and then writing in or pasting a value. In these JavaScript sections, you can actually set an environment variable and get it directly in this area. So a little bit different syntax, but you can see I'm setting it using the syntax right here. And then I'm like, okay, well, scroll. Okay, if the actual rate is less than this rate, then I'm gonna do something. And actually, if you guys, how many people have used Postman's console? Yes, okay. So if you go to the very bottom here, this doohickey, this console icon, you can open a console and you can make log statements, you can drill down, and let's go ahead and now that we opened it, we're gonna go ahead and hit send. How to get to, how do I get to the other window?
Command,
Command tab?
command, yeah, the tab. Or just click on the console again.
Oh yeah, good point. Okay. I'm used to my helpers here. Okay. So in this case, what got logged, similar to like DevTools and Chrome, you can see here's the request, here's all the information from the response. And in fact, I did have a log statement that I had written in my area, so I can do some debugging that way. Okay. I'm gonna go ahead and close that. So that's one request. That I have some logic, and I've set some variables. And in fact, if I go to this eyeball quick look, I can see these are the new environment variables that I've set. Now when I go to the second request, let's see what this one would do. Okay, so this one sends an SMS using Twilio's API, but how do you chain them together, right? You want to run them as a, actually some people chain them together by hitting the button and then hitting the button. That's one way to do it, very good. But you can also run it as a collection. So this is the collection runner that David was talking about earlier. If you go to this little flyout again and hit run, you can open up a new window, collection runner, and this is the way to run a collection inside the Postman app. So you're running it locally with the app. I already have my collection highlighted, and I already have my environment highlighted. I can do X amount of iterations. I can build in a delay between requests. I can log responses. I can actually cycle through a CSV or JSON file. And then I'm gonna go ahead and hit run, Bitcoin tracker. Here's my request being run, and I actually had 2 like baby tests. This is the the results of that test. Both are green, both passed. If I had any reds, I can go ahead and drill down on that. If I click on this one, I can drill down on the details here. So this is what's called like a collection run, and this has actually executed the logic. So you can see that if you had any branching and looping logic, if you had any you know, side effects that would occur from this, you can run it locally here in the collection runner. People say, like, what if I'm behind a firewall, or what if I want to run it on a virtual private cloud? We also have an open source command line tool called Newman that you can run it locally from your command line. And then what you'd want to do is pull the latest version of a collection and pull the latest version of environment and then run it that way using the Postman API. Any questions about running a collection locally? Okay. So now say you have like this beautiful like test suite set up, and you have your CAP API like all, you know, like running all your test suite, your entire test suite, and you want to run it on the Postman cloud. You want to set it and forget it, if you will. There's monitors too. What do you guys use right now for like monitoring endpoints, or like making sure stuff is like alive and running?
Another one called
Okay. So some people, because you've already kind of built your tests out in Postman, I'll go ahead and show you how to create a monitor. And a monitor is just a scheduled run. So we just saw Collection Runner running locally. We talked about Newman running it locally. This is a way to run it on Postman Cloud. So if I go to Monitors tab and go ahead and hit Add a Monitor, I'm going to call this like, I'll call it demo, very original. And then I can go ahead and schedule it. So I think you can run it as often as every 5 minutes, and some people do. So if a monitor fails, it informs their status page, or maybe use PagerDuty. There's an integration to be like, wake up, something's down. There's also multi-region monitoring, so you guys probably, I assume, just run it in this region. And then I think there's also the option to do like from a static IP. So you would go ahead and hit monitor this collection. Monitor created successfully. And if I go to, how to get to Chrome.
Scroll, open the slide out and click view and run.
Okay.
Yeah.
Huh, very nice, very nice. Now how to get back to Postman. Okay. Click the who?
You might go back and click that link, because I think Firefox.
Okay.
I think Firefox is good.
So I'm going to go ahead and run it. And so let me see if I have an example. I think I do have an example, but what you can imagine here is like every single time you run it, say you're running it every morning at 10 a.m., you have the feed, the heartbeat, if you will. You have the response time, and you have like the results. So if you have any log statements, let me go ahead and scooch over to, whew, something's happening here. This machine is making noise. Yeah. Okay, so monitors, go ahead and go to, I think DNS checker might have had some history. So here's an example of a monitor that I'd previously paused. You can see the response time. So maybe you didn't do anything different with your API, but some infrastructure person made a change, and you can see, whoa, all of a sudden our response time is, you know, skyrocketing. We can see that. And if you want to drill down on a specific collection run, so this one's like not hugely, but a hair up higher. So go ahead and click on it. Now you can see that this looks very much like the collection runner, and you can drill down on any of these requests that are run, any of the responses. And if you had any log statements, if you want to debug a monitor, you can see like what was going on there. Go ahead.
So that monitor saves your credentials for your API and your collection, correct? On the Postman.
So it saves anything that's in the request. So if you have sensitive information, you should stash it in an environment, and then nothing from the response is stored on Postman.
So how does it check how does the monitor check your check your collection if it doesn't have credentials? Does that question make sense?
So,
The question is, how does the monitor check your, how does the monitor run without your credentials?
so you can repeat over the mic so the viewers can see. So there are two ways of getting credentials. One is you hard code the values and using something like basic auth. What we recommend is you set up the auth at a collection level or the request level, so the auth credentials are generated at runtime. Or there are other ways to fetch the auth using pre-request scripts and load them into an environment. So there are multiple ways to do that. So you can hard code or you can generate it runtime. That makes sense.
Generate runtime on the monitor?
Yes. So a monitor is just running the collection. It actually executes the code that is inside the collection and it refetches the auth if you need to. Okay, so if you have basic auth set up, so it will compute the basic auth header. If you have OAuth 1 set up, it will compute OAuth 1's access header. And then that's what gets plugged in.
Computes them from what? From the environment that's on your local machine?
From the collection.
From
So the collection gets synced up on
it's saved to Postman Cloud. Yes, so it can generate the credentials. It either stores the credentials or it can generate the credentials, but the information that's needed to do that is on Postman's cloud.
And I think a lot of people, that's the reason a lot of people use Newman. So Newman, you take the collection, export it, and then Newman is running locally wherever your CI/CD pipeline is running or in your private cloud. And so your credentials are associated in that location rather than
So really quickly, you can either hard code stuff or you can store it in an environment, and then at runtime, the Postman monitor will generate those dynamic credentials. Sorry, lots was said. Is that captured?
One question based on what you said about Newman. If you run the collection runner through Newman, you still get the nice UI.
you get a variation of that, not this UI, but
Yeah.
Newman generates a report that has much of the same information.
And that'll be local as well.
Yes.
So the question from David was, if you use Newman, do you get this type of interface or results presentation? The answer is no. This is for a monitor. However, Newman does have custom reporters where you can output it the way you want, and then you would have those results locally.
One more point, I think, which is useful is you can import it back into the collection runner and visualize the results in the runner. So Newman generates a test report, and that JSON file can be imported. So of course, the run ran in Newman, but for visualization, you can import it back.
So Abhinav pointed out that in the collection runner, so say you're running it in Newman, you can, if you have the file of the collection run, you can go ahead and import that and view it similarly the way we saw it earlier. Okay. So do you guys, it sounds like there is some, I'd love to show workspaces. Do you guys want to see documentation at all? Like, is there a need to share, are people consuming it like on a web view and?
Yeah, we don't have documentation figured out for a lot of our APIs, so I don't know, do you guys want to quick vote? Do you guys want to hear about workspaces and over documentation?
¿Por qué no los dos? Okay, okay. So I'll go over documentation first. This came out relatively recently, but we've seen like a ton of traction and people are really excited about it. Say you've created your, say you want to share CAP, okay, with other teams internally or something. So you can share it with workspaces, and we'll walk through that in a little bit. But say you want to share it with like a technical writer, say you want to share it with like analysts or somebody like that, and you want to generate web documentation. They're not like technical people, maybe they don't want to putz around with Postman. So if I go to, let's say, okay, I'm going to jump over to a different collection here. This one's Imager. This one's a publicly available API, but like imagine like your CAP, or imagine 10 CAP API like collections, right? The world's your oyster. So in this case, they've used folders to organize all their stuff. You can see they have 82 requests in this one collection, and now they want to share it. So if you go back to this flyout again, you can actually see some metadata. And actually, let me back out. Sorry about this. Okay, so in the Postman app, there's a couple ways where you can kind of describe to people what's going on. So say you share with a teammate and you're like, okay, let's look at generate access token from Imager. And it's like, what's generate access token? If you didn't realize it from the title, you can go ahead and put some markdown in here. In this case, this is straight text, but you can put screenshots, you can put tables, you can put like whatever you want to describe in English markdown to somebody that's consuming it. In the parameter areas, so anywhere where you have this key value editor, say this is required variable, you can go ahead and do the same thing in markdown, create little descriptions here. The examples that we looked at earlier are also ways to document, here's what a 400 response should look like. Here's what a 201 response should look like, whatever. These are all ways to communicate to people inside Postman as they're consuming stuff, how an endpoint should be acting. So now, if we want to generate web documentation, you go to this flyout and you say view in web. Okay, so this is a private view. Anybody that's part of this team can view and consume this documentation. So you've probably seen something like this before, but this is all the markdown that was previously generated. Here's all the introduction kind of English that you're communicating to somebody. And then if you go to like this generate access token, now you see here's the body. You know, if you had any kind of description entered, it displays pretty helpfully here. Yeah. And then so any request, so this is in curl, but you can, at the top there was a drop down to say like, let's export it in our favorite language. Now you can export this curl request, this Python request, like whatever request. If you had any examples, you would also see the example response here in the side area as well. So handy dandy way to view things in a web view internally, but say you want to share it. Do you guys share externally?
A lot of our APIs are internal.
Okay. Okay.
There's lots of teams across Stanford, so there is that sort of.
Okay. So it's actually, I'll just show it to you if you have a need to do it, but you hit this publish up here. And then you can, again, so we talked about environments, and the best practice is that you kind of stub an environment before you share it. So you'd never want to share your local environment with the rest of the team, hopefully, well, maybe, with the rest of the team or externally. So you would share your stub here. And then if you have a custom domain, if you want to add like fancy colors or your fancy logo, you can go ahead and do that here and then hit publish collection. And now you go to the published view. So in this case, this is publicly available. I did not verify a custom domain. That's why it's on this Get Postman URL.
But if we wanted to run that on a Stanford.edu.
Yes, exactly.
Do that.
Yep. But it would be publicly available. Something that's different from the private view, from the private versus public view, is this run in Postman button. Has anyone used this before consuming documentation? Okay. So if I click run in Postman, I already have Postman installed, so I see this little modal, and I'm saying, yep, Postman for Mac. Okay, so I already had it here, but I can go ahead and import it as a copy. So this is a way, you can export a JSON file and Slack it to somebody, absolutely. But this is a way where if you have published documentation, if you have a tutorial, you can actually take that little button and embed it in like a whatever. Okay. So if you automatically generate the documentation, it shows up on the web view, but that button travels. Go ahead.
Show the site.
Oh gosh, do you remember the
So there was a, so that was in the like.
Is it Chrome?
Like ship this to Postman locally, like it just sort of figured that out.
Yeah, so the Postman app has a
Okta what?
which you have the run Postman button in the false tag URL, and the app opens up in the entire collection and gets imported. So you don't need like the copy paste like 82 calls and then.
So, yeah, many public API providers.
Yeah.
Publishing running Postman button is a way to onboard developers.
So this is an example of Okta. They do authentication, and they've generated like this whole slew of run and Postman buttons to highlight different types of scenarios, right?
And this is where I think we're not just talking about the executable version of the API. So you're not just distributing documentation, something somebody can pull in and actually fit it.
Actually, Joyce, can we show the code option?
The export code?
Yeah, this push to Postman. Sure. So once you have the API in Postman, you are not limited by 4 or 5 example languages. Postman supports like about 21. You can go ahead.
Yep. So we're back in the Postman app here, and if I'm like consuming somebody's collection that they've generated so kindly for me, I've gotten it working, maybe plugging in my own credentials. If I click this doohickey here, the code link, I can generate a snippet, and like maybe my app that I'm working on is like Node, and I'm using request, and then I can go ahead and copy and paste this directly into my yeah. I've used it. It's nice.
It's super useful, and I meant to show this in my
Yeah.
because when I was doing the GitLab migration, I actually generated the Python code using this feature of the calls in Python.
Yeah, it's very useful.
People really like this feature. It's very useful is what people here are saying. Yeah, I've used this before. It definitely is useful. Okay. All right. So I'm all over the place. I just showed documentation. Any questions on documentation before we go to workspaces? Okay. All right. So somebody had a question on Zoom about sharing collections. David already showed how to like import and export things. So I'm going to actually show you my personal workspace. It is a mess. Okay. So I'm going to show you this too because it's not a powerful feature, but I love it. If you just hover over this and start, you bring something to the top and then you can work on it, and it's a lot easier. Okay, so that's one thing. It's very messy, it's very cluttered. So if I wanted to create a separate workspace, say I'm working on a new project or with a new team or something, I can go ahead and go to this drop down in the upper area. It's currently highlighted on my workspace, but I can go ahead and create a new personal or team. So the team features as of right now are available. It's a paid subscription plan, so it's for pro and enterprise users. But for anybody on any tier, you can go ahead and create a new personal. So you can demo, one more time, demo, create a workspace, personal workspace, and now it's a brand new clean collection. So how do I scooch some collections over there? Okay, let's go back to my workspace, the cluttered one. And if I wanted to share this one, I can go ahead and again click this fly out here and click share. So I can share in another workspace, and I can see all my previous ones. I'm going to go ahead and share this in demo. Click share, and by default, all collections are view only. So if you share, say you have a group, a team, everything's view only. But what if I want like somebody else to be able to edit or collaborate on it? So I'm going to go back to demo, and now I see this. You can actually, oh my gosh, I just blanked. Let's see, share.
Sharing the team workspace will bring up those options.
Sharing the team. So I have to go to the build.
You can just share from here. Just share, and then select one of the team workspaces.
Oh, the team workspace. Oh, duh. Okay, I shared the personal. I was like, wait, I don't see it here. Yeah, so let's go ahead and share the same one into a team workspace. So this is part of the team plan. Oops. Did I? Oh, no, this one. This one fell out, sorry. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and share in, this is a team one. And by default, everything is view. But if I want, who's in, I think Sanjeev, you're in here.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go ahead and say, Sanjeev. Add him, and should we let him edit? Yeah, he can go ahead and edit this one, and then I go ahead and share. And now when he logs in, he can also, you know, sync any changes. So I think Abhinav was saying something about the history. The real-time history debugging is something that we did not know about as a benefit before building, but I'm going to go ahead and go to workspaces. If you go to history, you can see like the history of all the requests. And normally, I bet you guys like get something working, maybe use the code to export the request, and then you slack the curl request or like whatever, or you export the entire collection. Now it's like real time. It's almost like a Google Doc, where if you get something working and you're like, hey, Zach, check out the last request I sent, and then you basically are working off the same request that was last sent. But be careful, because if you send any naughty requests, that will also be in your history. Just kidding. No naughty requests. Okay, anything else about workspaces?
So
The workspace feature, you have to have a Postman account, right? Correct?
Postman account, yes.
And then it sounds like you also have kind of an enterprise track. Does that integrate with, like we have our own SSO here? Is it possible to integrate that with the enterprise version of Postman?
The question is about SSO and integrating with enterprise workspace. So I don't know the list of SSO providers, but does anyone know the list off the top of their head?
So Okta, one login, and any SAML compliant SSO provider would work. Yeah. And we can configure that immediately.
And we can map like work groups to team workspaces and things like that.
Yeah, so that's the feature that we're working on, and that's kind of coming up as the thing, and that's the thing kind of on our roadmap. So you will be able to map your SSO groups to your Postman groups. And what we're trying to figure out is this relationship between groups and workspaces, right? So like, you would want to give certain groups access to a certain number of workspaces, and you would want this configurable in the SSO provider. So that's in the works. But yeah, I mean, what we're envisioning is this one-click integration. You set it all up, and everybody kind of gets the workspaces that they should have access to.
Yep, so there is SSO for, and we're working on mapping enterprise groups to Postman groups. Anything else that I didn't cover about workspaces? Questions?
Activity feed.
Activity feed. So there is also, so I'm.
We can cover the web view as well, right?
Okay.
Yeah, the browser. Yeah, you're going for it.
Okay. So at the very bottom, it's also very subtle. Here's the build and browse toggle. You guys are all familiar with the build side. That's the request builder, the response viewer. If you toggle over to the browse, now you can see all the meta stuff that's associated with this workspace. So you have collections shared to a workspace. I'm in my workspace, but if I were in a team workspace, you'd see collections shared to a workspace or stored with the workspace, environments, any monitors that I have running, mocks. Dang, lots of mocks. Integrations. So integrations are something for the team plans, the built-in integrations, but everyone can build their own integrations with the Postman API. And the Postman API just lets you CRUD your collections, environments, mocks, monitors, like that kind of stuff. And then activity feed. Here's my diffs that are generated at this workspace level. Should I scooch over to the web?
Can I ask a question?
Yep.
Yeah. The app.
Yep.
Can you talk a little bit about the capture? Dicky up there next to
the proxy?
Yeah, the proxy thing.
Yep.
So one of the use cases I talked about earlier with the Chrome version of Postman, they had the interceptor plugin.
Yep.
Which allowed you to kind of share cookies and session information with a given website with Postman.
Mm-hmm.
And I think once it became an app, we kind of lost that feature. And you mentioned there may be a way to do that with the proxy. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I don't have any. So this is the proxy feature in our native apps, which mirrors some of the functionality that previously you would have had to use the Chrome Interceptor extension and the Chrome Postman app. Right now, I believe it captures HTTP requests, and I believe we're working on the HTTPS. But if you essentially turn this on, there's a little bit of setup involved. But if you are familiar with like the capturing network requests, if there's a really good GIF. I should have it at the ready next time. Essentially, if you're browsing something, you can capture all the history of network requests, and it just kind of floods in, and then you can save them to. I don't have a good demo. Do you want more words about the proxy feature?
Save them to collection?
Yes, yes.
So you can route them onto a collection, as I think Joyce has said. So the interesting part here is that this allows you to capture requests from any network device which is locally accessible. So if you have a mobile device, you can set the proxy and the proxy setup would be your local machine IP and this particular port. And what starts happening is then the requests are routed through the Postman app, and those requests are then put inside a collection or your history. So it works for something much more than the Chrome browser. And on top of that, Interceptor is in the works. I think, Joyce, if you can show the cookies section. So the reason we kind of built this post was people started asking for more features around managing cookies. And earlier you had to use the Chrome browser's cookie system for doing that. So you actually have more control through the cookie system, as I think Joyce has there. So you can edit cookies just like the browser right here.
But I would have to go and manually like track these cookies.
So you can copy paste from Chrome, right? So that's what some of the workflow is. But I think Interceptor support's going to come in 6.3. So we are at 6.0. So it's just a couple of versions of it.
So previously, the Chrome Interceptor extension, you can capture requests coming in through Chrome browser. With this proxy, with this proxy,
Just go back to the upper right-hand corner.
okay, sorry about that. With this proxy, you're able to set up any kind of locally available network device. So I think we have a really good blog post about setting up a phone and then just routing the port and the IP address. And then I'm browsing Facebook on my phone and I see all these requests being sent to Russia, like streaming in directly in Postman. It is actually pretty cool and a great demo, but I just don't have it set up now. And then the other question was about the cookie manager. Manually setting up like the cookies is, I think, the question. Oh yeah, we were going to go to the web view. Okay. Oh gosh.
The view and web thing probably open.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, I just thought I'd like summarize the bullet points.
Okay, so this is, we're in a web browser right now, but this is the view that you can get when you log in on the web. So you can see a lot of the same, am I in the, yeah, you can see a lot of the same elements. It looks very similar to the browse view in the Postman app. And here's all the metadata that's associated with this particularly selected workspace. I think there's not too many differences. There's search. Search is something that's very powerful. So if you guys like doing search across all the tagged elements, it's actually pretty helpful. What did you want me to show on this one? Monitors? Monitors is only
integrations, I think.
integration. Oh yeah, yeah. Okay, of course. Okay, so integrations we talked about earlier. You guys use GitLab. So if these are the ones that I have set up in this current workspace. But if I browse integrations, these are the ones that are pre-built. I don't. So if I view the details about it, in this case, this function is very similar to one that I already have set up for GitHub. So if I add the integration and then do the auth behind it, like any change that I save to my collection then gets pushed to a directory with the JSON file, JSON representation of the collection. So some people use this for version control. Let me go back. And then if you want to build your own, say you want to, actually for anything, I'll show you importing and exporting a little bit later, but here's the Postman API. You just generate your key and then you can do all the CRUD events on mocks, monitors, collections, environments, personal user stuff. Yeah, so just really quick to show you the import and export. So if you want to build your own converter because you have a very special format that you follow, you can definitely build your own, or you can just go ahead and import. I think we saw this a little bit earlier where we imported a folder, but you can import like whatever specification you want. You know, if you use Waddle, WSDL, RAML, Duple, so many that you didn't realize that one of those is not a format. Okay, I just entertain myself up here. You can also import, like, this is where you would import like your curl request or something if somebody slacked you a curl. So you have the import, and then on the tail end, you can go ahead and export if you wanted to. Like the best way to share is really through the Team Sync feature because it's real time. But a lot of people do export a JSON file. They export it or use the Run Postman button, but it is a snapshot in time. So if somebody like messes with something, then you're kind of like playing that game. Okay, so that's all I had. Any questions? Yeah.
It's a web server. How many users can we send web server API, or is there a limitation for the sending the request?
The number of requests?
Yeah, that's right.
What is the number? What is the request, the limitation for number of requests you can send?
So if you sign up for a free account, it's 1,000, but for the paid accounts, it goes up to 1 million.
To the web servers.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah. So you can, just for free, you can sign up for
Thank you very much.
So it's 1,000 for the free and what?
1 million.
1 million. 1 million requests with the paid. Oh. Yeah.
Is that all time or is it over?
Per month. Per month.
Per month. 1,000 or 1 million requests per month.
And that's listed on there's a pricing page on our website which has all that.
If I use the API server as a free signer, if the request is over 1,000, which status will come up? Will be done?
429.
Yeah,
I think so. It's 4.0. That's the response code.
The response code that is sent if you exceed the limit is 429.
Yeah. That's never been asked that question.
Yeah, I've never heard that question before. Good. Yeah, good question.
Yeah, so it says that your server could not return the response that you wanted because you exceeded some quota. I just let me check that again once. I've seen that when I was testing the feature because we were setting a limit of 10 requests, and then I ran into the limit. I have to check that again.
We're double checking that. I've never run into that myself either.
That's not for anything that you're running in the end. So if you're hitting send, or if you're hitting run in Postman in the local app, there's no limitation on that.
Yeah, I think just the mock server limit.
Yeah.
Otherwise, there's no limit.
Yeah.
For API calls that you can send through Postman.
The rate limit is not through the actual app sending and receiving, but it's for requests made to the mock server or like documentation, like those kind of views. Yeah.
So the resources that are there. So
Yeah. Yeah.
Using the mock server, in my is an internet connection required for that? Like
Yeah.
if I'm on an airplane and I'm too cheap to pay for internet, can I use the mock server and do my development locally, or do I need?
It's on Postman Cloud, right? Yeah, so the URL will live and it will work for anyone else but you. Yeah, you need internet to hit that URL. Yeah.
we have not heard that question yet.
Yeah.
They usually have to kill a mockingbird on the way.
Yeah.
So you have a conference coming up? Is there any info that you want to give?
Yeah, absolutely. The question was no plants. There is a Postman conference coming up. It's our first conference and we're really excited about it. So it's June 7th. It's a Thursday. The day before is going to be a half-day workshop. It's going to be pretty meaty. So it's a half-day workshop, and then there's an exam, so you can get certified if you care about that kind of thing. And then the full Thursday is a single-track conference. The first half is going to be kind of like Postman-centric. The second half is going to be like API-centric, like future of technology, like really cool, kind of cool stuff. So it's going to be in San Francisco. Yeah.
June 7th.
June 7th. Yep. And if you send at least 4 people, you get a team discount. Yeah.
So we're just about out of time. I wanted to thank everybody, our guests coming down from Postman, and also Dave for being brave enough to. There's a lot of people on campus using it, but Dave signed up to share today, so thanks, Dave. And I also just want to put something out to our community. Like, I think one of the things that we need to figure out is, some of this team collaboration stuff. And I think there's this sort of natural pattern that we'll fall into where the teams will be around schools. So like NRT will have their setup, GSB will have theirs, and engineering will have theirs. And those tight teams that already work together might be using it more. But I think what we should think about is, our developer community is bigger than that. Like, it would be great for, to have from smaller teams be able to learn from, how you guys are doing it, and if it were more centered around, like, say, the CAP API, no matter what school you're in, or the Sarah API, no matter what unit you work for, we might learn a lot more as a university that way. So I just don't think that's going to happen unless we talk about it. So.
Can you repeat all that?
Oh no! Oh no!
Oh, sorry.
I know.
Sorry, Don.
Thank you, everybody, for coming today.
Thank you.